I guess we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ashley Hopkins-Benton, and I'm a senior historian and curator here in the history department of the museum. I focus on social history. Arabella Goodrich is also here from the New York State Archives Conservation Lab, and I'll let her tell you a little bit more about herself and her job as well. But today we're going to talk about the Tuck High store, which is one of the long-term exhibits here in the museum. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of Tuck High, about how it came here to the New York State Museum, and about some of the curatorial and conservation decisions that we are currently making. So Tuck High, and as you see it here, it was located at 24 Mott Street, was founded originally in 1879. And when it closed down in 1980, it was at that point the oldest continuously operating store in Chinatown. And the name Tuck High means high integrity and honesty. So Tuck High originally, when it was founded in 1879, was located at 19 Mott Street, and it moved to the 24 Mott Street location in 1929. But by 1980, Chinatown was changing. Rents were rising dramatically. By some accounts, as much as 10 times what they had been, and a lot of small businesses were closing, including Tuck High. In the face of these changes, there was a lot of work being done to save this history of Chinatown before it disappeared. This was the point at which the Chinatown History Project was created. And the people that were involved with the Chinatown History Project were the ones who got in touch with the New York State Museum. So in 1980, Tuck High was run by several members of the Lee family, Wah-On Lee, who you see on the left, and Kun-On Lee, who you see on the right. Originally, it was founded by Fenwang Lee, who then brought on his nephew, Lianming Lee. And then ultimately they passed it on to his sons, Wah-On Lee and Kun-On Lee. So it ran for 3 generations of the Lee family, and it supported the members not only who lived and worked in Manhattan's Chinatown, but also numerous family members who continued to live in China. A third brother, Po-On Lee, also operated a branch of Tuck High for many years in Hong Kong. So it was very much an international business. Here we can see some photographs of what the store looked like in 1980 when the curators went to collect it. And when they went to pick up this collection, they did a lot of different kinds of documentation. So one of those is photography. The black and white photographs that you'll see through this presentation were their documentation of what the store looked like at that point. Tuck High served a lot of different purposes. It was more than just a dry goods store. So it did carry dry goods. It carried shelf-stable foods, kitchen utensils, incense, spiritual objects, shoes, paper goods, a wide variety of things. It was very much a general store. It also had an herb man or an herbalist who would dispense herbal remedies to people who were sick. And if you look at the photo on the right towards the back, you see a shelf full of drawers. This is where a lot of the herbal remedies would be stored, and the herb man would be standing there. And we'll hear more about him later. Of the basement, you can see it packed full of crates and boxes. In addition to importing things from China to be sold in Manhattan, the Lee family also imported things from China and then shipped them out to other Chinese communities around the world, especially in Latin America. So it was both an import and export business. A community space. And I know these photos from 1980 are not super promising. They knew they were closing down. But in the back of the store space, there was a place where family members and single men who were working nearby in Chinatown could come and take meals together. There was always tea on, and this was very much a community gathering space. The letter holder here, Tuck High also facilitated communications with family members that were still in China. So before the Chinese Exclusion Act ended, Chinatown was a very male-dominated space, and you would have encountered many young men working there, and their families were still back in China. Because of the ways that they worked and they moved, they didn't always have very permanent residences. So a store run by your family, like Tuck High, would be a place for receiving mail and also sending mail out to family members. And they often had staff members who could help write letters for workers who were not literate and could not write the letters themselves. Some more of the documentation that the curators did in 1980. You can see the measured drawings that they did documenting what the space looked like. When they brought the fixtures back to the museum, they reconstructed the front space that you see on the bottom, but we did not rebuild that back space with the kitchen, bathroom, and office. But they were careful to document those through drawings and photographs. The actual removal of the fixtures and the contents of the store took place on September 26th, 27th, 29th, and 30th in 1980. And the Lee family was still very much active in business until the very last day when the rent was up. The curators wrote, objects were being sold from boards stretched across boxes and from boxes on the floor until that very last day. They also did a lot of talking with the Lee family, talking about the products that they were collecting, what the history of the store was, what the history of the family was. The removal of the store collection and its move to Albany was documented in a New York Times article. The New York Times wrote, only a fortune cookie would have predicted that good fortune would come of Wa'an Lee's having to close his dry goods store in Chinatown a few weeks ago. He could no longer afford the rent at 24 Mott Street and was going through the mournful motions of closing the business his family had run for 101 years. And they went on to report a quote from Wa'an Lee. It was going to all be demolished and thrown into the garbage. I am very proud, and the community will be proud too. They're saying that it's coming to the museum and will be preserved. And this publicity was really important. For one thing, the museum, following this article, received letters from a number of people from all over the greater New York City area, not just from Chinatown, people that had been to Takai as customers, especially a lot of young people who said, every weekend I would travel into the city with my father and we would go to Takai. And I mentioned that Chinatown for many years was a very male space. Takai as a store continued to be a very male space. So in a lot of these letters we hear, I went with my dad to the store. Well, our mother also traveled to Chinatown and visited with relatives in their homes. So from those letters, we learned a lot about what the space meant to customers and what it was like for customers who visited there. It also helped facilitate connections with additional Chinese store collections because, as I mentioned, in 1980, Chinatown was a changing place. This was not the only store that was shutting down. And so ultimately, the museum acquired 2 other Chinese store collections, not the fixtures, but just the materials that they were selling to be part of this collection. First of those is the Sungun Xing Company, which had actually closed in 1972 and was warehoused in Chinatown. The New York State Museum curators got in touch with Jip F. Chun, whose father Chun Kao Chow was the owner, and they were very happy to provide materials. The photographs that you see here are from the collection of the Museum of the Chinese in America, which is still located in Chinatown today. And this became a really important connection. When these store collections were coming here to the New York State Museum, MoCA as a museum did not exist yet. But today we're able to partner with them and work with their archival materials and loan them some of the artifacts that we collected at the time. And you can see the envelope here in our collection is one of the things that came from Sungun Xing. We acquired a lot of stationery from this store. Second store was Kuan Yi Wo Co., which had closed in late 1979, early 1980. These artifacts came in from Weston Lee, who actually owned the Sam Wo restaurant, and the restaurant's warehouse was where a lot of the inventory from Kuan Yi Wo was being stored. He was in contact with the Lung family who ran Kuan Yi Wo, and they have been very helpful with a lot of research and additional information as well. So all of the fixtures were brought up to Albany, and they began installing them in the museum and Metropolitan Hall right away. Although they had collected these in September of 1980, they had a planned opening date of July 1981, so it was a super quick turnaround. And you can see curatorial staff and exhibit production staff working here to install them. I love this juxtaposition. So this is on the left, the black and white photograph is a scene from behind the counter of Takai looking out on Mott Street. And then on the right, from behind the counter today, looking out at the museum exhibits. Before I found the image on the left in the folders, I was so used to this one. So it's really weird to see the actual buildings as they were originally through the windows. This is the aforementioned herb man. You can see the drawers behind him where they would have stored all of the herbs. He was noted by the family as a really important part of this business and someone that they always employed that was a major service to the community. But the mannequin is a really interesting note as well. When you walk through the museum, you see that we have a lot of mannequins in our exhibits, peopling those exhibits and bringing humans to the spaces. When the New York Times article ran saying that we were going to open Takai, it mentioned that we were intending on putting mannequins in the space. And one of the letters that we received was from Robert Wong, who at the time lived in Albany. He was one of those people that as a child had visited Takai with his family, and he offered himself up as the mannequin. So as far as I know, he was the model for the mannequin that is the Herb Man today. So I mentioned it opened in 1981 in July. The opening was actually covered in a lot of Chinese language newspapers that were sold in Manhattan. And the community was very excited for this to happen. And a lot of members of the community actually traveled up to Albany for the opening. You can see some members of the Lee family with one of the curators in the space there. And there are two stories that I particularly love from this opening. So Wa'an Lee came to Albany. He did not announce himself when he came to the museum for the opening. He just went right to where the store was. And he had his key and he tried to get in, not realizing that the exhibit staff had changed the lock. But he commented over and over that my shop looks so clean. You've done such a great job at installing it. So he was really happy and proud to have it in the museum. The one thing he noted was the fact that there were discussions at the time, and because of the quick turnaround time, they were not able to figure out how to allow the public into the space in a way that was safe for the artifacts. And so the door was closed. And so he actually went back to Chinatown and created the close sign that you see on the door there today, similar to what they had in the store when it was still operating, and sent it up to the museum so that we could hang it in the door. And you'll still see that today. We continue to be in communication and work with various descendants from the Lee family. The generation that Wa'an Lee and Kunan Lee were from had 10 children. So we see all kinds of cousins and descendants at various times. Some were here visiting today. And we continue to learn about their story and also acquire new pieces for the museum. So here you see a tea set that actually came in from one of the family members around 2013. And it was noted that this sat on this particular shelf in the store and was where they would serve tea for members of the family that stopped by the store on any given day. We also recently acquired the chair that you see over there. That was a piece that was located in the family's living space, but was important to them. It was something they had imported from China and had traveled with them through various places. So that just came back to the museum today. Now, I mentioned that I would talk a little bit about curatorial things that we're thinking about now, and Arabella is going to talk more about conservation issues in the space. But one thing that we're dealing with is the issue of fading. This is an exhibit that's been up for 40 years. It has a lot of paper and textiles, and those are all things that get very faded in the light. And you can see from the box on the bottom, that top one I turned around for the sake of this picture, but you can see how much brighter this packaging originally was. So one of the things as we look at the space is we see a lot of pinks and tans now, things that were originally red. So we're thinking about ways to bring those colors back into the space, perhaps making reproductions of some of these products so that as a museum visitor today, you get a better sense of what the space would look like. And the color red is so important in Chinese culture and was so much a part of this store space that it is something that also working on the lanterns. As you see, if you go over to see the space today, you'll see most of the original lanterns, and these are silk and paper, both materials that don't deal well with being in the light for many, many years. So you can see on this one, it's very, very threadbare. There are some holes, there's some fading. And we want to preserve these so that they're available to researchers and people to learn about in the future. Right now, we're in the process of deinstalling these original lanterns. They will go for conservation at some point. They will have their own storage boxes made so they can safely be stored in the museum. And in the meantime, we're replacing them with new versions that will give a better sense of what they would have looked like in the store originally, their colors, their shapes, the vibrancy that they bring to the space. So on the left-hand side, you can see the front window of Takai with some of these new lanterns installed. You can see how much brighter it is. But I also love that these new lanterns even have a great connection to Chinatown today. So the paper ones were actually purchased from Pearl River Mart, which is a store that still has a very active presence in Chinatown and serves the community in a lot of the same ways that Takai did. And then the silk lanterns that we're working with come from Wing on Woe, which is now that Takai has closed and was the oldest continuously operating store in Chinatown. Wing on Woe is now currently the oldest continuously operating store on Chinatown. It has seen 5 generations of ownership. They are doing really amazing work in the community with preserving community history and promoting vibrancy of businesses. And what I especially love is that they were next door neighbors to where Takai was located. The 2 businesses ran concurrently for many years. So we've acquired new silk lanterns from Wing on Woe that we'll be putting into the Takai space. And because we were not able to get the ones that have the intricate painting like the originals, they're very hard to come by at this point. We had to buy plain ones, but we have a staff member who's working on reproducing those designs. So if you'd like to see one close up, I have one down on the cart that is a work in progress. So with that, I have one more thing, sorry. Also mention if you're interested in this history and learning more about the Chinatown History Project and about Takai and its importance and its coming to the museum, please check out the New York Minute in History podcast. The most recent episode talks about this Chinatown history. But with that, I will turn it over to Arabella and we can learn a little bit more about the conservation efforts that are happening in Takai today.